Welcome, everyone. I think it's time to get started. Everyone, this is Monday. Yes, it is Monday. You can start putting names back on days. This is week 2 of Commercial Excellence Month Live, brought to you by Vendavo. A couple of housekeeping items that we need to attend to real quick before we kick this session off. First off is the obligatory disclaimer. Effectively, what we're saying here is everything we talk about today is subject to change. Next, a quick reminder on how Q&A works. You can use the Q&A tab on your Zoom webinar controls to ask questions. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Know that if we aren't able to get to your question, we'll reach out afterwards with an answer and get you a satisfying resolution on that. And next, let's turn to what's coming up next. So tomorrow, Megan McLean, our Chief Services Officer, will outline Vendavo's methodology for customer services. And we're really excited to have Peter Knowles, Global Pricing Senior Program Manager at Medtronic, joining on the conversation to share his experiences. On Wednesday, we're going to be introducing our latest solution. That's Vendavo Margin Bridge Analyzer. It's built to handle enterprise complexity in price volume mix analysis with simplicity, with reliable and repeatable insights for action. The session will include a discussion on the role of causality as a key capability in commercial excellence, and we'll also have a live demo of the solution. And on Thursday, Jordan Hahn joins me, and we discuss how configure, price, quote solutions modernize your customer experience and let you gain control of your pricing execution through flawless agility. Now, folks have been asking for links for the on-demand view of our sessions. Rest assured that we'll be sending out emails with links and recaps a few days after the sessions. And of course, check back on our website as we make the event links available there as well. And with that, let's turn to today's session. So as I said, this is week 2. This is session number 6. The title for today is The Power of Dynamic Pricing in a Turbulent Environment. If we go to the next slide, I'll make our introductions here. So joining me today are Karl Larson. Karl is responsible for the pricing system Vendavo Price Point and the team behind it. He has more than 10 years of experience in price-related change management projects and also as a senior consultant and the project owner for the implementation projects. Also with me is Darius Fekete. Darius is a business consultant with over 10 years of professional experience in pricing and commercial transformations. He's an advocate for elevating pricing to strategic levels in organizations, and he's an expert in building dynamic pricing capabilities in commoditized products. So with that, what I would like to do is turn it over to Karl for a quick overview of dynamics in today's world.
Thank you very much, Mitch. I will actually move over directly to Darius.
Great. Very good.
Actually, I have the pleasure of kicking off this session and providing more context on the current market situation and dynamics. We are in an economic slowdown that brings about fundamental change to customer behavior and how we do business. It also means a structural shift in short and midterm to the economy. Practically, we are facing disrupted value chains and supply chains. That means we see increased lead times, delivery times. The importance of localized markets are gaining, and it's also a challenge to globalization. Social distancing for health and safety reasons means that results in the fact that we are sitting on Zoom meetings all day and managing our projects through Slack. We use Teams for discussions with our colleagues around the water cooler. But it also means that we have proof that home offices can be as productive as co-located offices. Uncertainty, additionally, always triggers a freeze on capital expenditures. That means that purchasing and investment decisions in companies are delayed or are subject to lengthy approval processes. This spurs an additional cost reduction, and cash flow preservation measures across the value chain. So economists still debate the shape of the disruption and the subsequent recovery. Some say it's going to be U-shaped, some argue that L-shaped, some even say it's going to look like the Nike swoosh. The shape is a function of the pace of the recovery and how long the lockdowns will last. But regardless, in all crises, we can distinguish three phases to frame our thinking and organize for today and the future. So the first phase is disruption, when uncertainty is introduced and unforeseen events happen. It needs cautious decision-making, protecting health, safety, and from a business perspective, cash flow and margins. In the new normal phase, market starts to stabilize, become more predictive. However, certain challenges remain. New perceptions of value emerge, and that means that businesses need to align their pricing models and go-to-market strategies to that value, to reflect those value perceptions and value attributes. In transformation, widespread growth returns, PMIs go up, GDP becomes more stable and on the growth path. And this is the moment where we want to scale our models that have been proven in the new normal phase. And we want to make sure that our growth outpaces the industry.
I think that's an important point, Darius, in terms of looking forward. It's not just getting used to the new normal. We've talked about this framework multiple times during the month, during the Commercial Excellence Month sessions. And the framework, I think, really helps us recognize, don't get just used to doing the things you're just doing now. This is the time to get that down and get it done well, but to look forward towards how do we transform our processes, our business operations to take advantage of what is happening on the other side, what we think will happen at the other side.
Exactly. It's how to build that platform that will help your growth in the future. And over to Karl.
So, hello everyone. I had the chance to work with B2B organizations, mainly within the manufacturing and the automotive space during the last 10 years. And typically the pricing years look something like this. In order to be able to publish prices 1st of January, the preparations starts in the autumn, in September, October, which includes activities like gathering information from the markets, exchange rates, simulate changes, get approvals, all those different processes that we do in the price management processes. Then prices are communicated to the markets, often a month prior to the validity date, and then they get valid. Then the team is working normally throughout perhaps 3 months or so, and then in April, it starts all over again to prepare the prices for 1st of July. And this framework is designed for stability and to be predictable. But the world moves faster and faster. And if you go to the next slide, Darius, and we talk a little bit about the classical methods within dynamic pricing. At its core, the dynamic pricing model is the concept of selling the same product at differentiated prices to differentiated groups of people in order to maximize the revenue. And most of these methods are typically seen and used in the B2C space. So you are probably used to dynamic pricing strategies when you are booking a hotel room or buying an air ticket, going to Amazon. So you see it all the time. And there are a couple of classical methods I wanted to highlight. You have the segmented method, where the price differentiation is based on perhaps a customer segmentation. This could be enhanced using AI, ML models, statistical models, other types of sophisticated models that predict a higher willingness to pay based on location, based on other parameters. Then you have the peak pricing. The typical example is that the price is raised during peak hours when the demand is higher. Time-based dynamic pricing, it's an example that could be an early bird discounted price, where people who are looking to be able to make a good bargain, plan ahead, and then you can serve them with prices, and then as you're closing up to the event, increase the price for the people who are not planning ahead as well. Penetration pricing, this is often to undercut the competition on price in order to win market share. And this is often used in combination with different types of marketing activities. Changing conditions pricing often relates to supply and demand, increase of prices when supply is in shortage, competitor pricing, and you need to respond to competitor activities, and so forth. And as I mentioned, these strategies are typically seen in the B2C space, where prices typically aren't subject for negotiation. If you look into how dynamic pricing can look like in the B2B space, I'd like to highlight two types of dynamic pricing. So you have the flat dynamic price. This is basically when you adjust price for all customers based on time or location or something like that. Could also be seasonal pricing. When you look into the individualized dynamic price, then you want to individualize the offerings, making sure you can really target the right customers with your pricing strategies. And if you go to the next slide, Darius, I will talk a little bit about when these different strategies typically fit. Well, when there are capacity constraints, like the airplane tickets or the hotel rooms, as I mentioned, and the willingness to pay is differentiated, then it fits quite well. Also, when you want to balance the supply and demand. So a good example that most of you probably are familiar with would be the Uber search pricing. So when demand is high, prices go up, and making sure you can balance both parts there. And if you look into the seasonal demand, a Christmas tree is very hard to sell in the summer. It's really seasonable. And then you can also optimize your pricing strategies accordingly. When it doesn't fit though, well, you need to make sure that the strategy fits with your corporate strategy, basically. You need to be able to communicate pricing. And you don't want to use dynamic pricing when there's no seasonality or no urgency, but there's full comparability. So then you would basically drive suboptimal buying behavior when the customer is trying to basically beat the system by finding their deals. And something that you cannot neglect is to add logical constraints, making sure that you can that you don't over rely on algorithms that potentially might live their own lives and end up with a price which is not logical. And the last thing I wanted to highlight here, which is quite actual today, is that don't use dynamic pricing in situations that can be deemed as insensitive or as profiteering. So in the COVID-19 days we're in, don't leverage that, because it will most probably lead to bad publicity.
Karl, I appreciate those points there. Those are really spot on. I particularly appreciate the difference between a B2C kind of one-off transaction as opposed to a B2B transaction where you're really counting on a relationship, a long-term, there are long-term consequences to actions. So let's go to one of the points you had there in particular. You called out, don't be dynamic if it's not aligned with your strategy. What would be some examples of circumstances where that where being dynamic would not be aligned with the strategy?
Well, in the B2B space, for example, quite often you have clearly communicated the price list to your distributors, to other parties that act on your behalf downstream in the supply chain. And you need to make sure they can rely on your pricing depending on how the business model looks like. And you also always need to be able to explain and defend pricing. So it's not something that fits the complete business.
Sure. If folks are used to a twice a year price change, it's not impossible, but it's something very thoughtfully, has to be done thoughtfully if you're going to go to more frequent list price changes, for example, because it has repercussions.
And well communicated.
And well communicated, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks much.
And yeah, and I also wanted to highlight that these strategies have been around. We do recognize them, all of us, but now we can execute at scale. In the B2B space, where you typically have very large product offerings signed to many, many different customers in many, many different markets, it's quite tough to execute. So you need to use the right modern software to be able to execute. And you also need to make sure you gather information and data to be able to execute properly on these strategies.
All part of being dynamic, absolutely.
Yeah, and transparency and communication of price changes always is key. Why is a price change? You need to be able to explain and defend and communicate that, and sometimes also drive the customer behavior by adjusting prices accordingly. So, Darius.
Yes, so dynamic pricing is actually executed by both the pricing and the sales teams. So as you mentioned, Karl, the two models earlier, flat dynamic pricing and individualized dynamic pricing. In flat dynamic pricing, it's rather used in B2C as a standalone. In B2B, it manifests in the form of dynamic list prices. Individualized pricing or dynamic pricing as providing guidance for sales on target prices, but also on approval levels and approval workflows, all to encourage entrepreneurship in the frontline team. So to use the context of the actual customer negotiation to capture the value. Dynamic pricing is as much about changing price lists as providing sales with the right set of guidance to individualize those prices.
Darius, I think that's a huge point there. The dynamic pricing in terms of, Karl hit this earlier, the dynamic pricing relative to list price changes is important, can be very important depending on the market circumstances. Maybe in different markets, the interaction is much more around the direct sales rep connection to the direct customer specifically, and your dynamic ability to change has to be granular at that point in terms of differences in guidance based on the circumstances. Would that be appropriate?
Correct.
Okay.
And when we think about those two dimensions, so dynamic pricing and actually empowering sales to create a bit more granularity and introduce more context into the pricing, and we overlay it with our disruption framework. So back to your case, Mitch, how we build a platform for the future and how we enhance our set of dynamic pricing capabilities across this current crisis. We see a list of different opportunities that we might introduce to our pricing logic, pricing capabilities. These are not exclusive to any of the phases, but timing-wise, they make sense where they are allocated. So let's take a look. First, in the disruption phase, you want to take control over your pricing. You want to manage the uncertainty that's been introduced to the market. So you want to create a war room for critical commercial decisions, and you want to understand the impact of those decisions. So simulations can help here, understanding what happened in the previous crisis, for example, what happened in 2008 and 2009, and whether that's actually a relevant crisis to look at and compare to. So these are the questions you might want to ask as a pricing team, as a middle office function. From the sales empowerment perspective, you want to make sure that you don't just drop prices as demand drops. Provide more guidance for sales in terms of insight on payment terms, understanding volume commitments, and create battle cards for your sales team to keep them empowered and support them in negotiations. Once the market stabilizes and you have a greater understanding of the business environment and potential change, you want to create business models and test business models that reflect a new value perception. For example, automotive suppliers might struggle with high inventory levels during the initial phases of the recovery. You might want to think about then subscription-based models or as a service models to service the market and to protect your profitability. For your sales empowerment and frontline, you still want to keep your battle cards to guide your sales on what type of business to pursue, how to create a value selling logic that is actually reflected in your business model. As an example, risk reduction might be more appealing to certain customers than, for example, a growth promise. So flexible contract terms might be more interesting to keep and go to market with. Once the growth has returned, you want to create more granular pricing to extract value. And this also means that you should have already enough data points to train any segmentation or machine learning, artificial intelligence models to introduce that granularity in your pricing decisions. Additionally, introducing next best alternatives will support you in capturing market share going forward and competing in your market to outpace industry growth. On the front line, you provide targets and approvals for informed decision-making and supported by individual performance monitoring. So to inform sales how they are doing versus their peers and also versus their targets.
Darius, this is a great outline of the comparison between those disruption, new normal, transformation across the kind of the pricing function and how pricers think about what steps they need to take and how that feeds the sales side, the sales organization, connecting with customers. Let's take a couple moments here. There's a couple of things that come to my mind. I think, Karl, you had some thoughts here on this one as well. When I'm looking at disruption, I think of, yes, we are absolutely in disruptive times right now, but if we think back, we've all gone through variations of disruption within our businesses, right? I'm remembering times when before I was with Vendavo, I was with a company where my product line, my business that I had plants manufacturing my material, my product that I was selling. And my disruptions were kind of two-sided. My plant would fall over. And so then I would have to scramble with controlling pricing. I was using pricing as a message to my customers that were trying to get product from a plant that wasn't shut down, drawing down the inventory that was there before anybody else did. So pricing was a consideration there. And so I could use that to message, but I had to be able to do that very quickly because nothing spreads faster than a rumor, right? And especially around supply side. So on the supply side disruption, I also had in the same business demand side disruptions because why? Essentially the shoe on the other foot, my competitors' plants would fall over. And so there would be a run on my plants for the same thing. And so again, messaging those disruptions, control, I think is kind of the big message here in terms of you don't want to be stuck with a situation where the only way to manage this is emails with spreadsheets pushing out to your salespeople that are on the road in the middle of talking with customers. You need a supportive enterprise-ready platform that has your strategy in mind, the latitude that is dynamic to give to those sales folks in those conversations to appropriately guide customers. The customers are in a disruptive situation there as well, and they need to have that long-term view of the relationship with you as a supplier, that long-term connection and saying, we're going to take care of you. Here's how we're going to take care of you. Part of it might be go all the way back to your supply chain. How do you manage with your plants and your supply chain? If I have to bring in stuff to supply you that you absolutely need, I need to give you a different price for that, because I have a different cost basis, for example. That is, sure, if you have 5 salespeople in one plant and 3 customers, that's manageable on a spreadsheet. If you get much beyond that, you need an enterprise level capability. Karl, I think you had some comments as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will touch up on that shortly on how you need to be able to execute your pricing strategies throughout a global organization. Also related to the sales empowerment when it comes to protecting the cash flows and those things, payment terms and other areas can also be subject of management here and be able to support with proper guidance, as an example.
Sure, having the payment terms change at the same time as you change prices as part of that overall, or not change prices, but the terms change. Absolutely. This is the one aspect of dynamic control. Absolutely.
And if you can go to the next slide, Darius. Just wanted to highlight a little bit around these challenges of executing the pricing strategies throughout a global organization. So typically you would have in the B2B space multiple sales channels, many different stakeholders when it comes to pricing. You would have different geographies, central, local, and so forth. And at the same time, you need to have control, as you mentioned, Mitch, but also efficiency, be able to act fast with speed in order to be able to execute properly. And this is, of course, a complicated activity and can potentially take a lot of time. And in order to ensure successful execution of dynamic pricing, companies need to have the appropriate IT and analytics infrastructure to support it with performance management capabilities. That way they can execute throughout their organization. And the dynamic pricing can either be on a strategic level where the pricing strategy could change depending on the market situation, or at more of a data input level, like a response to a competitive price change, for example. And should the strategy shift depending on the market characteristics, or should the price change based on dynamically changed data input? That is something that you need to define in the strategies and then execute efficiently. To be a little bit more practical, you can go to the next slide, Darius. So from a price management perspective, and mainly for those of you who use Vendavo price point, some of the things that you could do to be able to manage your pricing strategies actively is, first of all, to make sure that you do manage the strategies actively ongoing, analyze and deploy scenarios. Could you try again? And also be able to analyze and deploy scenarios depending on available information. So what do you expect to happen, and be able to prepare for different scenarios. And then obviously be able to prioritize the strategies for execution at scale. These are things that you can do as the preparation phase. But also to be able to automate active pricing decisions, to be able to execute fast, and make sure you can execute based on condition changes. Be able to automate repricing within pre-approved levels. So what does that mean? If you go to the next slide, Darius, I want to highlight a couple of examples of acting pricing decisions that you could basically include in your overall pricing strategies. So, for example, if the headquarters revises the pricing strategies and like to execute them throughout the complete organization, it can help to automate the price change recommendations that comes from the headquarters down to the local market companies, etc., and making sure you can automate those changes through in order to be able to act fast. On the second example here on competitor activity, so if you have a pricing strategy to be able to maintain a certain price position, then automate price changes based on the competitor activities. And here it's super important to include guardrails to make sure that you can have a price which is in line with your expected range, if you will. Could also be different supplier activities and cost changes from your suppliers. If your supplier, for example, offers the product in the market, you need to decide if you or if the supplier is the price leader and on that particular product range. If then the supplier is the price leader, then you need to make sure that you can continuously adapt to the price level which sits in the market. So you can do repricing accordingly. It could also be other types of external factors that you need to cope with. For example, it could be based on stock levels, as you mentioned earlier, Mitch, but it could also be conversion rate information you have from your e-commerce channels and so forth that you want to utilize in your strategies.
Absolutely. And Karl, this might be, I'd love the mention you made there of guardrails, and that ties into the need for a system, for a solution that incorporates that capability. For example, one guardrail that comes to my mind is, yes, you want to make a change based on competitor activities. So you're ingesting third-party information to say what's going on, and you have in general a let's say second highest price policy. But one of your guardrails might be, I need to have a little bit of consideration of the long-term relationship with my customers. So I'm not going to change prices more than X% in any period of time. So you might have a business decision to say that that's worth it in terms of the long-term relationship with the customer, to say this price change was initiated by this external data. It would have normally been here because of my relationship, and you would want to have already talked to your customers about this, not just give them this benefit without them knowing it. But I'm going to limit you to a certain amount of range over a certain period of time. And absolutely, even though you might have talked to somebody about it, you might say, you know, I gave you this limit before, but this time I can't. Unless you have a dynamic system that is enterprise level, you can't turn those knobs quickly with agility, have the flags come up, and to your point you made earlier, the logical check, the business sense check of what comes out of these systems, that somebody that knows the business, that all the little nuances that can never be programmed into the algorithms, somebody that knows the situation can say, yes, that's appropriate, or we need to do something that's more commercially appropriate than what this particular instance is. So great points on this.
Yeah, and those guardrails can as easily be also simple ones as I will not sell below cost.
Exactly.
Or, you know, other types of guardrails that you want to make sure you can commit to.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you add a couple of layers of business logic like that.
Absolutely. Your guardrails should be easy to understand, easily managed, manipulated within, and then understand when those flags come up, what the basis was. That's back to the simplicity. People need to understand how the recommendations are made so they can check the logical assumptions along the way and see if they make sense in these disruptive times, all right?
Exactly. And to have some closing remarks, perhaps you can start off here, Darius.
Yes, exactly. So if you're thinking about building or enhancing dynamic pricing capabilities in your organization, a checklist to take away would start with understanding your current positioning in the market, understanding the current impact of disruption on your industry and on your company, and creating scenarios to see how this pandemic and economic slowdown would impact your company.
And as I've been talking about here all the time, enable pricing strategies for global reach across the business. And this is always challenging within the B2B space where you have a lot of stakeholders, but it's important.
Yes, and once you have created those pricing strategies, you want to actually revise your old thinking and create models that feed those pricing strategies for a new situation with new sets of data that are more relevant in the market that is about to shape.
And there's no silver bullet. Every organization is unique, so you need to design a data model that serves your decision flow, making sure you have the information you need in order to be able to execute.
So once you have that, you need to start also measuring the efficiency and whether it delivers the outcomes that you would want to achieve. So create your KPIs and be able to monitor performance on a real-time basis.
But really, do not overcomplicate. Simple is fast. Fast is critical when it comes to this. So don't make it too complicated. It's better to act than not act.
Darius, Karl, these are great points. Bringing it back up to that level of, you know, moving, getting something simple that's easy to understand is absolutely critical. I do want to revisit point 3 there and take that a little bit of a tangent here, but I think something that both of you have seen some relationships in what businesses are doing right now. A lot of what we're seeing, we've had discussions over the last week, and we're going to have some more as we go through the remaining part of Commercial Excellence Month, is around changes in business models. So point 3, revise your old thinking and your business models. We're obviously seeing a lot of businesses that are being stressed with revenue. That means that they're going to be making decisions around CapEx, buying new pieces, buying new things, new pieces of equipment. That means if they are continuing to operate those pieces of equipment, that the people that sell those pieces of equipment are going to be asked to do more services, right? They're going to be, the people owning those assets are going to be sweating those assets harder. The people that had been selling those are going to have to think more about how to support those pieces of business, those pieces of assets rather, over the long term. Is there, what would you say that there are things that people could do in terms of rethinking their models, rethinking their operations around that shift in spending, more service and aftermarket stuff relative to the asset purchase outright? Any key points there?
Karl, do you want to take that?
So if you look into that, obviously these days you need to make sure you can capture the aftermarket, which has a more stable demand typically. And when you look into that stable demand, you also need to be able to categorize the products properly to be able to differentiate your strategies. But for sure, there will be more focus on the aftermarket, spare parts, etc., since it's a more stable demand there compared to the capital equipment side.
Sure, some real opportunities there to pick up on the measurements that we've got. You know, the KPIs, the data models. Be thinking about maybe this is a time, if you were doing a lot of individual prices, maybe bundles that are more oriented towards the service support, or conversely, if that is what everybody's doing now, maybe you disaggregate that so that people have the choice to buy things that are smaller and less of a issue in the remaining budget. So shake things up there, be thinking about what your customers are thinking about.
Yeah,
and on top
something,
on top, what you want to also think about and test whether perhaps an outcome-based model or a usage-based model would be more beneficial for your customers. That either delivers a certain outcome or provides a flexibility in reducing risk and reducing costs if recovery doesn't come as fast.
Yes, of course, the power by the hour Rolls-Royce GE jet engine model there is something to keep in mind in these times for sure. And Karl, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you should always consider these things, but it's more actual today when you have disruption.
Absolutely, absolutely right. These are things that you need to have at your fingertips all the time to be aware of these changes. It's just a lot more apparent, a lot more urgent right now. Very good, very good. All right, so gentlemen, let's shift over to some Q&A. We've got a couple of questions here that I'll lodge with you. And folks on the webcast, again, use that Q&A function on Zoom. Drop your questions in there. As many as we can, we'll get to right now. If we're not able to get to your question, we'll reach out with an answer following the webcast. But first off, this question is to Karl. Karl, you showed an example of pricing cycle for a manufacturing company with the generation of list prices twice a year. My company only does that once a year, but I heard of some industries where list prices are generated quarterly. What's the best frequency?
There's no silver bullet there, I think. The optimal frequency would depend on how your sales channel looks like and how your industry works and so on, and also how your agreements look like toward your customers. But the trend is that everything goes faster and faster. So you need to look into how you can execute faster, and perhaps parts of the assortments can work more dynamic than other ones. But there's no optimal frequency, one size fits all kind of thing. It's something that needs to be dependent on your business setup.
Absolutely, and Karl, I would totally agree with your observation. It's the tendency is to have a greater frequency, a faster cycle time. Just that's the pressure. Everybody knows so much more about what's going on and requesting or needing a difference than what they had earlier the day before. Next question, Darius. I'm going to point this one at you. I understand the need to be granular for negotiations with specific customers for specific circumstances. How granular should my list prices be? Is there a benefit in simple list prices and negotiating from a single number, or am I likely to miss opportunities because customers don't know that I'll price appropriately for the situation?
Okay, so complex question, and of course there's multiple aspects to think about. First, you want to create a logic for to capture differentiation, and there's a quote, I believe, from an American airline CEO saying that if I have 1,000 passengers, I want to have 1,000 prices. Actually, those the 1,000 prices might be 1,000,000 prices because it might be 1,000 different purchasing occasions, opportunities, and more context around the sales process. So you want to create that level of differentiation. The other aspect is, where do you explain that logic, and do you leave it to sales to explain that logic, or do you introduce it earlier in your list prices? Good rule of thumb is to check how much differentiation do you want sales to be explaining towards the customer, and if you can lift some of that effort closer to list prices and create a more differentiated list price, you will make the negotiation process much more transparent, easier, and also more empowered.
That's a great point. There is a load on the sales team to do the explanation, and that differentiation, that granularity is super granular, but that same customer coming in and checking on a airplane ticket and getting 1,000 prices for the same flight because they checked 1,000 times. Now we're at millions of explanations of what's going on there. So that's a load to be considerate of for sure. Karl, here's a question for you. I'll read this too. Okay, I get it. I agree that dynamic pricing is necessary for business today, but I think my Excel spreadsheet gives me the agility I need to react quickly and get pricing out to my sales team. What more should I need? That's a setup there. I think that's ready for you.
Yeah, but it's great to be able to have the information, but you need to have information data to analyze and evaluate, and need to make sure you can execute efficiently on all markets, all sales channels, and typically there are a lot of different Excel spreadsheet price points that you need to update. I need to update them fast with quality, and you need to make sure that the correct price records ends up in the ERP for execution or to the sales teams as guidance. And yeah, so it's often a complex operation to coordinate all these things. And that needs a lot of work. And you need to be able to execute ongoing on this. It's not a one-time effort. It's something that should continuously be running. And in order to be able to do that, I would recommend to utilize the tools and solutions which are built for that purpose, so that you have the continuous execution of things in order for you to be able to analyze the results, make sure you can improve the strategies that you deploy in order to maximize the results.
Yeah, I think totally agree with the key points there being, it's if you're in enterprise, you need enterprise level capabilities. Part one of the course is being able to get that out on a dynamic, agile basis to your sales team so they have the information for them. But a huge part of the enterprise level capabilities and the strength of enterprise level capabilities is closing the loop. This is a process. My background in process engineering, you don't have control over process if you aren't measuring and feeding back in information in terms of the impact of those actions that you were taking, so you can tune future actions. So if really kind of hard to do that on a spreadsheet that floats around, that probably one person has all the links tied to all the databases that get broken all the time, and that's not and Frank in sales didn't get the email, so it didn't. Yeah, all those things are not enterprise level capabilities. All right, one last question here, and I'll give this to both of you. This is from a person who asked, and Darius, we'll go to you first, and then Karl. Which KPIs would you recommend? Really high level question, but maybe relative to today's environment in particular. Anything off the top of your mind on that, Darius?
So which KPIs to recommend? It's really a matter of adjusting to the market disruption phases and the market disruption model. In the first phase, in disruption, I usually look at cash flow related KPIs. Days inventory on hand, days sales outstanding. I want to understand the cash conversion cycle, and of course, as well as monitoring profitability and price realization. When we are transferring to a new normal, it becomes a more profitability and price realization focused KPI set. So whether I'm achieving the price list changes that I'm proposing, whether my sales team is quoting close to my target prices, and if I'm using any, or if I'm leveraging any usage-based models, are those actually relevant in the market? Do they provide differentiation across customers?
That makes sense. A little bit of different timing for different KPIs, different focus at different times. Absolutely makes sense. Karl, any thoughts?
Yeah, what just wanted to add to that is that obviously the KPIs needs to be connected to the strategy that you set. So what are the targets with a strategy? If the strategy is to be able to gain market share, you need to make sure you can monitor the sales, the volumes, those types of things. If it's to optimize the profits of a more stable demand, then you need to monitor the margins over time and those types of things. So it's really connected to the target with the strategy.
That makes sense. Let's start with a strategy in terms of what you think the best direction for your business is, and then pick the KPIs according to that. Very good, very good. All right, gentlemen, I think we're at the end of our questions now. This is a really good time to wrap up. I want to thank both Karl and Darius for joining me today. Appreciate all the time you guys put in on this to bring this information to the attendees here at the webcast. So thanks for joining.
Thank you. Happy to join.
Thank you very much.
All right. So let's take a look real quick at what's coming up again. For our upcoming events, tomorrow, we're going to be talking about Vendavo's methodology for customer services. That'll be with Megan McLean. She's our Chief Services Officer. And we'll also have Peter Knowles, who is the Global Pricing Senior Program Manager at Medtronic. So we're really happy to have a long-term, very valuable customer speak about their experiences there and relate that to you. On Wednesday, we're going to be having our debut a Vendavo margin bridge analyzer. That's how you handle enterprise complexity and price volume mix analysis. Those kinds of observations we were just talking about with KPIs and measurements, particularly appropriate and particularly easy to execute with margin bridge analyzer. So we'll have a discussion of causality in terms of commercial excellence, how that's a key capability, and we'll also have a live demonstration of the solution. And on Thursday, Jordan Hahn, who's our product manager for CPQ, is going to walk us through how CPQ solutions can help you modernize your customer experience and control your pricing execution. So really tying into what we talked about right now, just now with Karl and Darius, and how CPQ can be another way to get your arms around your strategy and getting that out there. Again, the links for on-demand views of these sessions will be coming out with emails, with links and recaps of the sessions. And of course, check back on our website as we make those links available there as well. And with that, we'll close today. Thanks for everyone joining us. And until we speak again, have a profitable day.